Hello everyone! Today, we're taking you back to 1872, to a moment in Philippine history that changed everything, the Cavite Mutiny. This event was not just about soldiers and workers rising up. It became a spark that inspired courage, justice, and fight for our rights as Filipinos.
The mutiny happened on January 20, 1872 at the Cavite Arsenal Fort San Felipe. About 200 Filipino soldiers and workers joined the revolt because their privileges, like tax exemptions and freedom from forced labor, were suddenly taken away. The revolt was led by Sergeant Fernando La Madrid, and during the fight, some Spanish officers were killed. Within just 2 days, reinforcement from Manila arrived and crushed the mutiny. Even though it was short, this event had huge consequences because the Spanish quickly used it to punish reform-minded priests and suppress Filipino voices.
Then let's go from comparing the causes. When we compare the two sides, the difference is clear. The Spanish said it was a planned revolution with secret signals and coordination. The Filipino side says it was a spontaneous protest sparked by unfair treatment. The Spanish point to reports and confession to support their claim. Filipino historians point to the specific degrees that removed worker privileges. The fact that only Cavite revolted and the lack of real evidences connecting priests to the mutiny. One side turns a labor protest into treason, the other side shows it as a fight for fairness. Thank you.
When we talk about the Spanish perspective, Spanish authorities claimed that the mutiny was not just a small protest, it was a national plan to overthrow Spanish rule. According to the Spanish historian José Rizal, Filipino priests and intellectuals were secretly leading the revolt, and signals like fireworks in Manila were used to coordinate it. They said the goal was to set up a new government. To back this up, Spanish official used Governor General Rafael Izquierdo's report and confession from captured mutineers. However, many historians now believe that some confessions were forced, so the evidence is questionable. Using this story, the Spanish arrested and executed Father Gomez Burgos Zamora, also known as the Gomburza, claiming they were the mastermind behind the mutiny.
Filipino historians, on the other hand, tell a very different story. They argue that the mutiny was a local protest caused by unfair labor policies and the loss of privilege. Soldiers and workers were faster than after to these stages. The revolt happened only in Cavite, and there is no evidence the priests like Gomburza were involved. Even French observer Edmond Plauchat noted the fireworks the Spanish claimed were secret signals were actually part of religious festival. This shows that the Spanish authorities exaggerated the story to punish priests and reformers.
The Spanish blamed priests, saying Gomburza and other secular clergy were leading the revolt. But Filipino historian shows that it was mainly soldiers and workers who act. There's no real evidence that priests were involved. The Spanish may have exaggerated this because they wanted to stop the secularization movement, which gave Filipino priests more control over parishes. So, the same event it told into very different ways depending on perspective and power.
Evidence for the Spanish claim. The Spanish presented several pieces of evidence. First, Izquierdo's report claimed rebels wanted to set up a new government. Second, they said fireworks in Manila were secret signals. Third, confessions from mutineers named priests as leaders. While this seems convincing, historians now think the confessions may have been tortured out of the rebels, and the reports could have been biased, making the Spanish evidence weak.
Evidence for the Spanish claim. The Filipino side relies on the fact that mutiny happened right after privilege were revolt and only occurred in Cavite. No other province joined. Observed like Edmond Polchert confirmed that fireworks were part of the festival, not a secret rule. This shows that revolt was about workers' right, not independent. It reminds us that looking carefully at the fact can reveal a very different true official report.
Why the Spanish story dominated? At that time, the Spanish controlled the courts, media, and official reports, so their story became widely accepted. A small labor revolt was turned into high treason, which allowed them to arrest and punish priests who were gain influence. Father Burgos, in particular, was seen as the threat because of its work in the church and the community. These show how power can shape history and why we need to compare multiple perspectives.
The tragic result Gomburza. The Spanish version of events led to the execution of Fathers Gomez, Burgos, and Zamora on February 17, 1872 by garrote. They were dressed in priestly robes to symbolize authority and intimidate others. But the truth is, they were innocent. The church even refused to defrock them before the execution, showing that the Spanish story was politically motivated. Their deaths became a symbol of injustice and inspired the Filipino people to fight for it.
The execution of Gomburza had a huge effect on Filipino reformers. One of the most famous, José Rizal, was deeply inspired by their sacrifice. While the mutiny itself didn't succeed, the Spanish punishment created martyrs and sparked national awareness. What was a small revolt in Cavite became a symbol for the fight for independence, showing how even minor events can lead to major historical change.
Lessons from comparison. This story teaches us that history depends on who tells it. The Spanish exaggerated the event to justify eliminating reformers, while Filipino historians focus on facts and context. By comparing both sides, we can see how bias, power, and political motives influence historical accounts. It reminds us to look at multiple sources before forming conclusions. In short, the Cavite Mutiny was a local protest, not a revolution. The Spanish authority exaggerated it to eliminate leaders they didn't like, but their action backfired. The execution of Gomburza inspired reformers like Rizal and sparked Filipino nationalism. The mutiny didn't succeed as a revolt, but it succeeded as a symbol, showing that small acts can create big changes in history.
To sum up, 1872 marked the start of Filipino nationalism. A small, local revolt exaggerated by Spanish authorities led to the martyrdom of Gomburza and inspired generations of Filipinos to fight for interdependence. This story teaches us the importance of examining evidences, comparing perspectives, and understanding history beyond what is written in official reports.
And with that, we can see that the Cavite Mutiny was more than just a